Welcome to a conversation on national security through stable peace. I'm Harry Kreisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our distinguished guest today is Professor Kenneth E. Boulding, University Professor Emeritus of Economics at the University of Colorado, who during the spring 1987 semester is a visiting professor at UC Santa Cruz. Professor Boulding is an economist and systems theorist and the author of numerous books, and he is a former president of the American Association of American Scientists. Professor Boulding, welcome to Berkeley.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here.
As an individual and as an economist, how and when did you become interested in the problem of peace?
Well, as an individual, really a very long time ago when I was a boy, essentially. I grew up in Liverpool long before the Beatles, of course, but as I was a boy in the First World War, you see, and some experiences there which I won't go into led me into the feeling that this was just an intolerable piece of human stupidity. And so I became very peace-minded, shall we say, even when I was about 14, I think.
And this would be at the time of the World War I.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right, just after, yes.
Yeah.
I was 9 when it ended, you see, so I remember it very vividly. So that, I think, it goes back as far as that. And then, of course, I became an economist and so on, you see, and I was brought up a Methodist, so I wanted to save the world, you see, and then, of course, I came to this country as a graduate student and fell in love with it, and I've lived here over 50 years now, so even though I don't quite sound like it, I feel myself very much of an American.
Now, as an economist, did you conclude that war wasn't profitable, or what was the issue there?
Yes, well, that came a little later, really. Of course, when I started studying economics, this was just the beginning of the Great Depression, you see, when unemployment was the overwhelming problem, but in later years, I got very much interested in this and did some studies of the economics of the war industry, as I call it, and also the economics of imperialism, which is somewhat related to this. You see, I've actually been teaching 1 or 2 courses in this, and certainly I think the evidence is very strong that the war industry is a very severe burden on the American economy, and of course even more so on the Russian economy because it's a larger proportion, and particularly in that it's a brain drain. See, it is, and this sort of malaise we have in declining or not much increasing productivity has something to do with this. Well, the way I often put it is that the man who ought to have been designing Hondas in Detroit was designing missiles for Lockheed.
Now, so science is ambivalent about war, isn't it? On the one hand, peace researchers really are trying to uncover the roots, the structure of peace. But on the other hand, science in general is in service to military needs and military discoveries.
Well, science rather tends to go where the money is, but also scientists are human beings, you know, like the rest of us, and they participate in the national cultures that they belong to, even though they also participate in a world culture. So I would say science is a little ambivalent about this.
And do you see the scientists, though, making an important contribution to our understanding of what peace can and should be?
Well, I've been in this almost from the very beginning, really, in what we call the peace research movement, which is an attempt to mobilize social sciences particularly, because fundamentally war is a social phenomenon, although it has implications in all the other sciences, naturally, in terms of its technology. But this began really in Palo Alto here in 1955, when I was at the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences there, the first year it was operating. A little group of us got together to asking ourselves, how was it we all felt that war and peace were the really fundamental problem of the age, that with the nuclear weapon, which of course had happened by then, you see, it is that the whole world had changed, as Einstein says, it's just we hadn't changed. And how did we mobilize the scientific community to work on this problem? And so we decided to start a journal, which is still going, matter of fact. We called the Journal of Conflict Resolution. In a sense, that was the beginning of what you can call the peace research movement, and it's we have a world organization, the International Peace Research Association. It's my wife has been editing the newsletter of, actually. It has been located in Columbus for the last 3 years. It's going to Rio de Janeiro now, which is interesting, and it has been all around the world.
As an intellectual problem, how should peace be approached?
Well, obviously there are many concepts of it and many definitions of it. I mean, the simplest concept is simply not war. It's what I sometimes called inclusive peace. And that is a pretty sharp distinction that most historians can tell you if this country and that country were at war with each other on 15th of September 1855 or something. You see, yeah, it is, although there's a little hard to say when we got into war with Vietnam, maybe by a few weeks or so, but it's a pretty sharp distinction, and it has a good deal to do with what I call the taboo line. You see, it is in peace you refrain from doing things that you may have the power to do, and in war you don't. Like killing people and bombing cities and all that, you see. So it is a pretty sharp distinction, and I think a very important distinction. Now, of course, and I've argued really that about 85 to 90% of human activity is peaceful. I mean, peace is plowing and sowing and reaping and making things and being on television and getting married and raising a family and dancing and singing and opera, you know. And this is a very large part of human activity, and that war is a kind of interruption of this in many ways. And
now, conceptually, you've articulated the notion of a stable peace as an ideal and in part a reality. What is stable peace?
Well, I've argued that this is something that's happened really only within about the last 150 years. I don't think it happened before. That I argue there are really four kinds of stages here. There's stable war, which is what we've had pretty much in Southeast Asia now for 50 years. This is very expensive and unpleasant, so it becomes, you get intervals of peace. You get unstable war with intervals of peace between them. The intervals of peace tend to grow, and you get what I call unstable peace, which is what we've had over a large part of the world for a long time now, where peace is regarded as a norm, but interrupted by wars, you see, and then you have the war in order to re-establish peace, of course, on what you think are your terms and so on. And then stable peace is something which I don't really think existed very much before certainly not before the Napoleonic Wars. And I argue it really begins in Scandinavia when the Swedes and the Danes stopped fighting each other about the 19th century, you see. And then we get it here in North America about 1870, I would say. We didn't have it in 1812 certainly. It was pretty shaky when it was 54-40 a fight. Remember, what was that, 1839? My American history is a little vague here. And the British nearly intervened in the Civil War, but didn't quite. Then after that, it became a habit. Stable peace is what we have with Canada. I mean, that is, it involves just... and the conditions of it are really quite simple. You just have to take national boundaries off the agenda. You say, no matter how arbitrary they are, and after all, the 49th parallel is as arbitrary as anything you can imagine, isn't it?
So that Canada is not desirous of taking over Peoria or
no, and the United States doesn't want to take over Canada.
Right.
You don't, and now I argue we have what I call a great triangle of stable peace, really, from Australia to Japan, across North America to Finland about. You see, we have about 18 countries, I would say, that have no plans to go to war with each other whatever. And it's more complex than that. There's different, some of them are in NATO and some aren't. I mean, and it is perhaps a little significant that they're all what you might call social capitalist countries in a way. But then I argue really that with the nuclear weapon, this is the only kind of national security we can have. That national defense is broken down fundamentally. And I usually illustrate this by pointing out how the invention of the cannon destroyed the castle in the feudal system. When the weapons were spears and arrows, it made some sense to have a castle or even a city wall. With cannon, which came about 1500, the feudal system just crumbled. If you stayed in your castle, you got blown up with it. Well, that's what's happened with the nuclear weapon, isn't it? You see, in the United States, we've lost our moats. We used to have the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. Today, these are utterly trivial.
What sort of policies can bring these changes to stable peace about, or are they just the result of technology?
Well, I would say up to now, it's been rather accidental, just luck. You see, just luck. The United States and Britain are a good example. We got the, after the War of 1812, we got the Rush-Bagot Agreement, it was called, of 1817, which hardly anybody knows about in this country, was to disarm the Great Lakes. I want a national holiday for this. This seems to be one of the most important events in American history, really. The first successful disarmament agreement almost in human history. But it all happened a little accidentally, and now what I'm interested in is making it a little less accidental. That is, I want this as a national policy, you see. It is, and I want us to state very, very firmly that the national defense has broken down. It can no longer defend us. In the long run, it can only destroy us, because it's an illusion to think that a deterrence can be stable forever. Systems of deterrence have always broken down. And there's a good mathematical reason for this. See, it is that if deterrence were 100% stable, it wouldn't deter. See, as if the probability of nuclear weapons going off was zero, they wouldn't deter anybody, would they? Be the same with not having them. So if you are to have deterrence in the short run, it has to break down in the long run if you wait long enough. So that one of the things I'm pretty sure about the future, I shouldn't say that here, is San Francisco is going to be destroyed by an earthquake in X years. I don't know what X is. Could be tomorrow, could be 100 years from now. It does have the San Andreas Fault underneath it, you know, and all that. And the international system is the same. The United States, if this present system can, if national defense can continue, the Soviet Union and the United States will destroy each other, and perhaps the whole world. We don't know that.
So what are the 2 or 3 things that might move us in this, the recognition of the truth that you're talking about?
One, I think, is the recognition that national defense has broken down. You see, it is the clear statement. I'd like to see the President write with a clear statement that this is so. And oddly enough, you see, Star Wars is a recognition of this. But I think Star Wars is humbug. It's just utterly ridiculous. I mean, there's no word to describe it, but lunacy. This is utter illusion, because it isn't a shield. It's a better weapon. Mm-hmm. See, it isn't like a suit of armor. It's and my own view is that it would be, if we ever, I think it's highly improbable you could ever do it. But even if you could, it would be very destabilizing. I think it's just. But on the other hand, it is almost an unconscious recognition that deterrence cannot be stable forever. And then I say the only alternative to deterrence is stable peace. And the conditions of this are pretty simple, really. You just have to say to each other, well, we're not going to fuss about national boundaries. And I would say to the Soviets, okay, we will guarantee your boundaries. You can do what you like inside them. You see, yes, it is. And they need to say the same to us, you see. And then, as I say, you have to have a minimum of intervention in each other's affairs. And you have to stop horsing around the world, you see. You just stay home, mind your own business. And there's an enormous amount to be said for this. You see, it is the way to get rich is to stay home and mind your own business.
And I think there's a Boulding law that goes with this, is there not, about the relationship between power and wealth?
Yes. Yes, I said you can summarize human history in a single sentence, that wealth creates power, power destroys wealth. And every empire has been an example of this.
When one looks at your writings on these issues, the importance of images seem very important to your understanding of the situation and how the situation can be changed. Could you explain that for us?
Well, we can almost put it in this way. The critical question now is, how do we learn not to fall over a cliff without falling over it? Because there is a cliff in front of us, and we're rather galloping towards it almost. See, and that's the imagination, isn't it? the only way you can do this is by knowing, imaging the cliff in your mind, and turning away from it when you're going towards it. See, that's so I think one of the great problems is that most people in political power today are still, well, some of them, I won't mention any names, are about my age. And my generation is sort of obsessed by the Second World War and the First World War, for instance, you see. It is that we lived through. And now the world is different. It's a very different situation. And we've moved into what I call a new region of time, where the system has changed. It's just like going from the land into the sea, almost. They say when you go from the land into the sea, you find remarkably few elephants. The whole system is different, isn't it, you see? And that's what's happened with the nuclear weapon, but we haven't realized this. We're still living in a world that has passed away. And
so what is the key, though, to changing this consciousness, to seeing the cliff differently or avoiding it?
Well, it's learning, isn't it? You see, it is. How do you create a learning society? And this is a very deep responsibility, not only of the educational institutions, you see. It is we should be teaching this in the high school, shouldn't we? Even in the grade schools. But then also the media have a great responsibility here, I think, both the newspapers and television and so on, which you're helping with.
Right.
And just the individual citizen who gets concerned and tries to learn about these things and forms little groups to study it and so on, you see. This almost has to begin at the grassroots, I think.
Now, you're talking about a leap of the imagination, which one will find in a creative genius such as yourself. But we're talking now about popularizing that insight. And in popularizing it, you have the resistance of the institutions in place that have a commitment to the ongoing image.
That's right.
What do you do about that struggle? I mean, it's not an easy thing.
No, it isn't. And it's, well, I sometimes say the only thing to do is to work at it. You see, I'm a great believer in what I sometimes call nag's law. All good things come by nagging. And you just have to nag and nag, you see. And I think people are realizing this. It's rather interesting. My wife was on the congressional commission that recommended setting up of what are now called the Peace Institute, National Peace Institute. And they held hearings all around the country, and as she said, the most supportive hearings were in the war colleges. Because in a sense, you see, there are a lot of bright people in the war colleges, after all, and in a sense they realized that it digs up. You see, that really, war has come to an end from any reasonable practical point of view. Just as dueling came to an end after we went to pistols. It just stopped like that, didn't it, really, almost, in the beginning and middle of the 19th century. Because you were the pistols, and you both got killed. Well, when you both got killed, and somebody challenged you to a duel, you said, oh, we don't do that anymore. And it's the same with war. It's just the same. We both get killed. So if somebody says have a war, I said, oh, no, we don't do that anymore.
You mentioned earlier, in terms of your life, the delegitimation that came after the experience of World War I. And then, obviously, science has a role, you've sort of described.
That's right.
Looking over the long term of your life, which is a long span, I mean, are you more hopeful the way things are going now in terms of a general kind of consciousness of these insights?
Well, I sometimes say I'm a little bit of a pessimist here, but I'm an optimist here. I mean,
you have to explain that.
Well, I still have this feeling that the capacity of human beings for learning is a very long way from being exhausted. You see, and that once we realize that things have changed, then we will change them accordingly. So I have somewhat. Now, it may take some catastrophe to make us realize this, because Chernobyl awoke people to the dangers of nuclear power, didn't it? Well, Chernobyl was designed not to go off, you know. The nuclear weapons are designed to go off, so that even the probability were quite accidental beginning of a nuclear war, you see, is quite real, and that we need to do much more in the way of defending ourselves against accidents, you see, and against responses to accidents, you see. And you suppose that Cleveland suddenly disappeared. What would we do? You see, it's very, suppose one of ours goes off and what shall we say, Kiev disappears. What do they do?
Now, somebody out there might be watching and saying, well, look, this is all very interesting and very ivory towerish. The Soviet Union is an empire that doesn't want to give up controls of people under, its domain. Now, on and on, ad infinitum. I mean, let's apply your insights to a U.S.-Soviet relations. What specifically should be done that might move that relation to a more stable peace?
That's right. Well, I think leadership, you see, that is that if the American president made a strong statement that national defense had broken down for both of us and there was no security. You see, what I want is national security. You see, I'm very much interested in national security. I don't want a world state, really. I want variety. I want a love of variety. This is the ideology that can help to save us. It's just the delight in variety. She's saying that you're different, how interesting, instead of you're different, oh, how frightening, you see. And the environmental movement is an important part of this, you see. Just the love of the planet, you see, just the love of this incredibly beautiful, marvelous world. You see, that I think everybody has some of this, you see, and you can appeal to this, I think, and that... Well, I think we've seen something like this almost happening in the Soviet Union. You see, that Gorbachev, I'm no expert on this, but my impression is that he's different, that it's a new age there, and that he's opened a window. You see, and we say, oh, there's a window open, slam it shut. You see, that's what we've been doing. But that's so crazy. You see, there's open a window. Let's go through it.
Isn't the enemy to all of this that you're proposing really power, existing power relations within countries, between countries?
Well, power is a very tricky thing, you see. What do you really have the power to do? And a lot of power, I sometimes say that 99% of power is illusion. The 1% that isn't is important. You see, what does we put 8% of our economy into the war industry. What kind of power does it give us? I'm saying practically none. It gives us the power to conquer Grenada. Well, that seems expensive, doesn't it? You see, it gives us an extraordinary little power in the world, really. Do we, you wonder, are we any more secure, or do we have any more power than Costa Ricans do? I think we're much less secure. I don't really think we have much more power. You see, it's just an illusion to a very great power.
Now, what is an individual to do to accomplish toward achieving the kind of ideal that you're talking about?
Well, I think to think about it and read about it and talk about it and get together with other people, you see, and to think about it, really. You see, and you think is to realize that the world is very different from what it used to be, and how is it different? You see, just ask ourselves what has really happened, and I think people can do that. You see, it is now we got to get obsessed by the past. You see, it is we're in the sense that the older are much, of course, deeply traumatized by Hitler and the Second World War, you see, you see this all the time, you see. But really, it's not. Gorbachev isn't Hitler, and not at all like Hitler. In fact, that was a very improbable event that happened. A 1,000-year political flood, I've called it. You see.
In the span of your life, one final question requiring a brief answer. What is the insight that has most impressed you about these issues that you have acquired in the course of your intellectual odyssey?
Well, I think it is the insight that the world changes. You see, that is this, and that you have to learn about this and learn pretty fast sometimes, and adjust to it. You see, that is and I think the other insight is that it's a world that's worth loving. You see, I mean, that is, and that Unless we love it, what's the point of living in it, you know?
On that very positive note, Professor Boulding, thank you very much for joining us today, and thank you very much for joining us for this conversation on a stable peace.
You're very welcome indeed. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.